Hello, everybody. This is John Blank, uh, Zacks Chief Equity Strategist and Economist, and this is Monday, June the 6th, 2024. I am going to go through one of the most international and global of sectors, the basic materials sector. In our framework, as we've always been using, we will go through the three parts, top steps by market capitalization. And in this time around, the other two are probably going to be the most interesting because so many basic material companies are state-owned or very big. We really do need to get into the top stops by maximum number of analysts and also find new names that are doing interesting things by looking at the largest 1-month percentage change in current fiscal year one earnings estimates. This is the core piece of the Zacks Rank for short-term buys, and it's going to give us a lot more interesting names to look at. So we're going to get on way. Before that, though, let's do the disclosures. These are my views. I have a PhD, and they're not necessarily the views of Zacks Investment Research. Go ahead and read the rest of this at your leisure. Of course, first step up is the three groups over here, top stocks by market capitalization. They're going to be ranked by the 5 industries that are in the basic materials: chemicals, metals, steel, paper, agribusiness. I'm going to point out here, metals non-ferrous, that's basically gold and silver and things like that, and steel, those are your metals, and metal downstream thing in the case of steel, which uses iron ore. Chemicals, paper, and agribusiness tend to have a common pattern, and we're going to learn that metals, non-ferrous, and steel have new and interesting things to talk about. For example, the 1-month percent change in forward estimates was going to give us Fortuna, silver, and core mining. Silver really, has not been of interest for some time. These are down in Peru and Bolivia, a lot of these mines. Old-fashioned story going back 500 years in South America. Mexico, Bolivia, Peru, the silver story. So you probably don't know Fortuna Silver, and you probably don't know Core Mining because they're in Chicago, but they're an old mining group from the 19th century. Coeur d'Alene Mining, of course, Idaho. Klabin. This is the biggest producer and exporter of recycled paper in Brazil. Packaging, board, boxes, and logs. Of course, there's the Amazon story and the rise of that business. So like I said here, using forward 1-month endo is going to give you a lot of names you probably have not seen before. Kronos Worldwide, there would be another one. And then over here, unlike a lot of sectors, the differences between the large market cap ones and the ones that people are following can be quite dramatic. For example, Albemarle is the lithium producer. It's only $14.5 billion, but doesn't make the list over here. It does lead the list here. Ecolab, again, a downstream chemical provider with a lot of business. It's going to show up twice and be a name that actually has a really strong earnings story because it has a much more diversified business. And then, of course, some of the other names that are in both lists. But keep in mind here with this industry, the very super big names are often either national champions or state-owned or some type of national origin. So you're going to be names outside the United States that are domiciled in places like Brazil, the UK, things like that. So let's get on to the top stocks by market capitalization. And let's talk about the forward 12-month PE ratios for these stocks. Now, I circle around a couple 4 groups just because they are the highest PE stocks. As you can see here, PE stocks generally between 10 and 14 in this industry. That's a value stock rating. These are low growth, non-infotech names. However, over here, for example, Freeport-McMoRan is at 27 PE, Southern Copper at 28. Why is that? Right now, copper is a hot commodity. Its price is near 2-year high, and it's headed higher. Copper is so hot because it's in cars, phones, and power lines. It's in solar panels and wind turbines, meaning it's leading the renewable energy transition. So copper, and you can see here the Southern Copper and Freeport-McMoRan are actually transitioning out of COVID and they've always been, frankly, higher
not always higher PE ratios. They were down in the 11 and 12s, and now they're up in the 27. So you can see here, just by focusing on those two, they had a story that was picking up for a while, and then they came back down, and now they're back up again. Dr. Copper, keep in mind, very cyclical story here, but also structural story. So again, a story that we overlook, and now we don't. Now, over here, we got Ecolab, of course, and Lind. But GVDNY is the most. This is a fragrance maker. So again, this is in the fragrances and perfumes business, very different part of chemicals. For this business, probably don't know it, is a European company, GVDNY. So always, people, we can come back here and look at this list. That's Givaudan SA. It was a $42.5 billion company, and you probably did not know it. Now you can see here, it has been doing quite well because fragrances have been doing quite well. So this is what's interesting about this entire business, is that we can learn a lot of things that we probably didn't know anything about. Revenue forward 12-month charts. Here I noticed something interesting. Steel and metals are, fairly stable and doing reasonably well. And you can see here a downturn in chemicals, paper, and agribusiness off of the COVID pandemic 2022 highs for these groups. So we all know the PMIs in manufacturing are going down lately in the United States. And we can see for these groups that it's kind of been projecting itself in these three industries for at least a year. However, going the opposite direction is the metals, non-ferrous, and the steel businesses. These are, the electric vehicle and renewable energy transitions, the rise in China, buying of gold. And over here, we've got the industrial story of infrastructure and the story of, frankly, the shutdown of the mines or the production of steel in China for COVID. We'll get into that as well. So these two stories are kind of the opposite of these two stories. And these three kind of run together, at least in this chart. But keep in mind, you can always come back to this. And of course, the point of these is to get these charts from us and start learning more at a top-down level about names, companies, industries, and things for you to get better at investing. All right. So what I said over here, what's causing steel prices increases in 2021? There it is. There's a big run up in steel prices. Go ahead and click on Madewell Concrete Products little blog here. They'll tell you what was happening. So it's really interesting story what happened here. You probably forgot about it. So go ahead and read about that. And you can see here, of course, things like Dow are much more related to a COVID pandemic story than something like Ecolab, which is coming out quite nicely. But keep in mind, there's always kinds of stories. Lind, Air Products and Chemical, and Ecolab are doing well. Dow, not so much. Over here, we got stories. Southern Copper right there, as I was talking about. However, Freeport-McMoRan is actually not doing as well on its current story. Maybe that's changing in its estimates. We will find out. Paper. Here's a fascinating cratering you're going to see in earnings in a lot of these paper companies. However, of course, there's always going to be exceptions. Suzano is a company outside the United States. I believe it is Brazilian, and it has a different story. BG, Bunge. Bunge is a whole farm-to-table agribusiness story, very different than CF, Nutrien, Mosaic, Yara. These are all fertilizer companies. So that gets us into there should be chemicals and agribusiness. In this business for materials, these are really fertilizers, making fertilizer. And as you can see, it had a big run in the COVID period, and now it's coming back down. Again, a lot of this probably was the shipping shutdowns and the shipping costs that caused some of these people to have to produce domestically in their various regions that could charge higher prices. So basically, there was a COVID element to this as well. All right, free cash flow. Always want to know if the business is actually throwing off enough cash. And And you can see here, there is that COVID story for steel. Here is the fascinating story of paper's free cash flow falling apart after COVID. And of course, you've got a lot of different names that are actually doing decently well off their highs, of course, in this COVID story. And then, of course, chemicals, all these different names. Here is GVDNY now down at the bottom, not as strong as you'd think, and Lind actually doing quite well. All right, on we go. Return on equity. Again, I would probably focus mainly on these names here. And again, we're going to see the same name. There's GVDNY and SCCO. Going to be pretty common to see that. And of course, here is that big spiky story that we saw in COVID for the steel and the agribusiness companies off the pandemic story. Dow, of course, also very pandemic related, other than the other chemical companies, not so much. On to the next one. Reinvestment rates. Generally speaking, you'd like to see people putting money back in the businesses, and you're seeing one name out here, SLVM. It's very interesting. Agribusiness. This is obviously telling you the story of the COVID pandemic. Very interesting to get back into that now in hindsight. Earnings pureness. How much is really coming from the businesses? They're always going to go up towards 100%. And it's always interesting to keep that in mind. And you can see some things, there's a lot of stories here, but I don't generally find it as interesting as CapEx. If you're going to be investing in your business, that's what you'd like to see. Here is Air Products and Chemicals. Really strong story on CapEx, and they're doing quite well. Suzano, remember, that's a Brazilian company. Very different story than you probably did not know. Nutrien doing a lot of investment in CapEx, growing their businesses. Total debt. I found some of this fascinating. Who has a lot of debt? Glencore, for example, big time debt and issues there. So keep in mind that, we can always look into the back end of these big companies, and sometimes the balance sheet really does matter. Depreciation and amortization, we can skip. On to the next set, which is top stops by the maximum number of analysts. I like to go here through actual price, EPS Surprise, and consensus earnings charts. And of course, over here is Albemarle. That's the lithium producer, and you can see the whole collapse of the battery, lithium price story. Looked great until 2023, and like everything happened, the electric vehicle slowdown really took Albemarle down with it. Do we see any turn yet? No, we do not. Not in the estimates, not in the prices. Ecolab, I told you about, really a strong stock, and you can see the estimates on 2025 are doing what you'd hope they do. PPG Industries, old school, I think it's in Pittsburgh, and again, it came out of the pandemic and looking quite sharp actually here on the 2025 story. You may got a interesting trade here for PPG. That might be a buy. Lind, this is classic. That business, this is, a classic investment stock. You get those earnings estimates cranking up in that direction. You keep this story higher and higher and higher, it's going to work for you. Tech Resources, here's Barrick Gold. Barrick Gold obviously was doing not much until gold prices went through, the roof for the last 6 or 8 months, and now that whole story has changed. Is there a trade here? You're going to find that to be a Freeport McMoran. Here is a story where the share price rocketing higher, but the estimates really are not yet. So maybe people are seeing a future boom in copper, and that will catch up. HBM over here, smaller name, don't know much about it, and you can see that it's got a story though coming up from the share price. $10 a share, it's coming up. Something is happening there. All right, Vale, the big Brazilian iron ore miner. You can see the things have been basically flat. During the pandemic, there was some action, but there's none now. Nucor, Steel Dynamics is a name I often see, and again, the estimates are looking fine, but it's looking more or less priced in. WestRock is a name we played in large cap trader, and it was a nice momentum trading stock. even though it was in paper. A lot of it's because it's foreshadowing some type of move in the estimates. Don't like the stock now, though. It looks overpriced. In international paper, this is a business that has really not come out of the pandemic very well, and I would probably stay away from it. Again, you're going to see names over here that you may not know, so you're going to have to go back to our main table for tickers and work through that. Price to sales. Obviously, valuations matter here, and again, you can see Lind taking off. Lind has got a nice story in this earnings charts, and the price to sales ratio is rising. People like that stock. They like its story. Keep that in mind. So always can come back here and look at different stories of how valuations are expanding in this current stock market. It is a valuation driven market and might be seeing stronger earnings out there after the Fed and the European Union cut rates. Profit margins, of course. There you go. FMC, gold. Mondi is an interesting name. It's a UK-based conglomerate. Valet, pretty good ROEs or profit margins, or I should say, at Valet. So always can come back here and look through the profit margins. Return on capital, again, you're going to see these big pumps off the stories of the shortages and COVID pandemic. And we're still not seeing the real bottoming here. But keep in mind, for example, here, steel, return on capital in steel is much higher than it was pre-COVID. Even though it's come off these highs, it's still higher. That is the infrastructure story and why you do get steel trades playing out. And the same is true over here for metals, non-ferrous. Yes, they've come off the COVID pandemic highs, and also, yes, they're generally higher than pre-COVID. So keep that in mind. Paper, very different story. Wide range of issues in agribusiness, of course. That's total COVID pandemic stuff. Dividend yield to the 10-year. You want a name over 1 to be of interest here. We've got only a couple names. Ternium Steels, TX, and Valet are the strongest, and they are doing, basically pretty well in this environment. If you're looking for a dividend stock, Dow would be the other one to bother with. All right, here we got CapEx and depreciation. So Albemarle doing a ton of CapEx spending relative to its depreciation. Of course, that's the lithium mining and air products and chemicals, the other one that is really interesting in that chart. Total debt to capital. I just want to point out Scott's Miracle-Gro. Kind of the outlier here. Fascinating why Scott's Miracle-Gro has built so much debt. I assume some story is playing out there in terms of M&A, that someone bought a lot of companies, put a lot of debt in that company. That might be a private equity story with Scott's Miracle-Gro. All right, so we're going to get into the last set. This is probably very interesting from this current industry's perspective. Keep that in mind. It's always industry driven, but which of the three is more interesting? And this is certainly a case where we're going to pick up some interesting names. Number 1, back to the steel story. I put that link up again for you. There you can see huge move in that steel thing. That was really classic. You can see the big play that blew up the lithium miners. And then, of course, you've got all kinds of interesting stories down here in agribusiness and the paper decline, once again picking up, as well as the rise in the metals non-ferrous story, which is the new post-COVID story. Cash flow yields. Interesting stuff. Keep in mind, this is really about these metrics. Those are the things that matter most, the actual numbers here. Enterprise value to sales. I just want to point out here a couple names and why this is interesting. So here you get enterprise value to sales, the highest price ones, the one that people like. Names you probably don't know. Perimeter Solutions, ticker PRM. Manufacturer of firefighting products and lubricant additives. Vox Royalty, returns Mocus royalty company. A lot of different jurisdictions based in Toronto. Probably didn't know that one. Vox RPRM. Names in this setting, you can learn a lot of names that you did not know. Very interesting to use this area and these names and go back to that first chart and get it right and learn these companies. And then, of course, go to Zacks.com and study them further. Liabilities, not as much interest for me. Quick ratio as well, not so interesting. That's it for me. John Blank, PhD. And this is always going to be
Available on YouTube as a video, but if you want the slides, the data, the information, the context that we're talking about,
give us a call or send us an email. 866-794-6065.
send us an email, strategycall@zackspro.com, or find us on the web, www.zackspro.com.
I was got a LinkedIn page and a Twitter feed, but these are the numbers that are key.
Keep in mind, always can call us, get these slides.
That's what this is all about. Please reach out to us. Thanks again.